I almost deleted the footage. 47 minutes of B-roll, generic coverage, nothing special. That's what I told myself for 6 months, until the night I finally watched it again, and my whole world cracked open. There was something in that video, something I had filmed with my own camera standing right in front of Carlo Acutis' tomb that I had completely missed. Everyone had missed it, but that February night, alone in my editing room at 2 a.m., I saw it, and I couldn't stop shaking. It wasn't a glitch, it wasn't a camera malfunction, it wasn't a trick of the light, it was something that shouldn't have been there, something impossible. It took me months to understand what I was looking at, and when I finally did, everything in my life suddenly made sense. Every loss, every question, every wall I'd built around my heart. But to get where I am now, you'll need to hear this story from the beginning, because what I discovered, no one was prepared to see it. My name is David Ferraris. I'm 40 years old, and for 15 years, I've made my living as a documentary filmmaker based in the mountains of Colorado. I've filmed ancient churches in the Italian Alps, pilgrimages in the American Southwest, forgotten monasteries in Ireland. I've spent my career pointing my camera at religious experiences, always from a safe distance. That comfortable barrier between observer and observed, that invisible wall between me and whatever I was filming. I was good at keeping that distance. Too good, maybe. My wife Elena used to watch me editing late at night and just shake her head. David, you film other people's faith like you're studying animals at the zoo. Does any of it ever actually touch you? I never knew what to tell her. Maybe she was right. Maybe after years of framing crying statues, treasured relics, and pilgrims on their knees, I'd developed a kind of spiritual immunity. I could see everything, but I felt nothing. Or at least, that's what I believed. Everything changed in the fall of 2023, when I got a phone call that would turn my life inside out. A producer from New York named Maurizio. We'd worked together on a documentary about Catholic shrines a few years back. He had a new project in mind, something different. David, I want to make a documentary about Carlo Acutis, the beatified teenager, the one whose body is in Assisi. I knew the name. Everyone did by then. The Italian kid from Milan who died of leukemia at 15, beatified in 2020. His body now displayed in a glass case in Assisi. They called him the patron saint of the internet, the millennial saint. He'd created a website about Eucharistic miracles when he was just 11 years old, a story that seemed tailor-made for our digital age. Interesting, I said, keeping my professional tone. What angle are you going for? Something different, not the usual saint biography. I want to understand why this kid is touching so many people. I want to film him with fresh eyes, and you're the right person to do it. I said yes without thinking twice. Good money, fascinating subject, and a chance to spend a few weeks in Italy's Umbria region, far from Colorado's early winter. I had no idea what was waiting for me. I left for Assisi in mid-October, time to coincide with the anniversary of Carlo's death on October 12th. I figured there'd be more pilgrims, more material to film. I was right, but not in the way I expected. Before leaving, I'd done my homework on Carlo Acutis, born in London on May 3, 1991, to Italian parents who were working there temporarily. Baptized at the Church of Our Lady of Dolaur, then moved back to Milan a few months later. Catholic schools, first San Carlo Institute, then Tomaseo, run by the Marcelline sisters. He'd received his first communion at just 7 years old, at a convent church near Lecco, with special permission from the bishop because of his exceptional spiritual preparation. But knowing the facts didn't mean understanding the person. And at that point, I didn't understand. I couldn't wrap my head around how a 15-year-old could be so deeply religious in an age of PlayStation and social media. How could he spend hours in prayer and Eucharistic adoration while his peers were just trying to have fun? I didn't get it, and maybe I didn't want to. It was easier to file him away as an interesting sociological phenomenon than to consider the possibility that his faith might have been the real deal. I thought about his illness too. A fulminant leukemia, M3 type, diagnosed only the day before he was admitted to San Gerardo Hospital in Monza. 3 days after diagnosis, he'd slipped into a coma from a cerebral hemorrhage. And on October 12, 2006, at 6:45 in the morning, he died. 15 years, 5 months, and 9 days of life. So little time, yet such an enormous impact. I wondered what he thought in his final moments. Whether he was scared, whether he suffered, whether he felt betrayed by the God he'd loved so intensely. But the testimonies said the opposite. They said he'd accepted his illness as an offering for the Pope and for the Church. that he'd asked not to undergo painful treatments so he could stay lucid until the end, that his last conscious words were a prayer. I couldn't fathom it. At 40, with all my experience filming people of faith, I couldn't imagine that kind of serenity in the face of death. I arrived in Assisi in the early afternoon. The town was exactly as I remembered from previous visits. Cobblestone streets, honey-colored medieval buildings, the Basilica of St. Francis dominating the valley below. But there was something new in the air, a kind of anticipation, like the city itself was holding its breath. I parked near Porta Nuova and walked into the historic center. The streets were packed with pilgrims, tourists, families with children. I heard Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, English all around me. There was a particular energy in the atmosphere, different from my previous visits. I soon understood why. Many of these pilgrims weren't there for St. Francis. They were there for Carlo. I stopped at a cafe near the main square for an espresso. The barista, a man in his 50s with a gray mustache, noticed my professional equipment. "Filmmaker?" he asked, sliding me my coffee. "Yeah, working on a project about Carlo Acutis." He nodded slowly, with an expression I couldn't quite read. Every day, hundreds of them come. Young people, mostly. I've never seen anything like it in 40 years of working here. Not even for St. Francis. "What do you make of it all?" I asked, genuinely curious. He shrugged. "I'm not a church-going man myself, but I see what I see. I see kids who arrive here lost and leave with something in their eyes. I see mothers who cry in front of that glass case and then smile. I don't know what it is, but something's happening." I finished my coffee and headed toward the sanctuary of the Spogliazione. The barista's words echoed in my head. He wasn't a believer, yet he'd noticed something. Something that I, with all my years of filming the sacred, had always managed to avoid seeing. I checked into a small hotel near the main square, dropped off my equipment, and decided to do a preliminary visit to the sanctuary of the Spogliazione, where Carlo's tomb was located. I wanted to see the place with my own eyes before I started filming, to understand the space, the light, the atmosphere. The sanctuary is housed in the Church of Santa Maria Maggiore, one of the oldest religious buildings in Assisi. It's called the Sanctuary of the Spogliazione, the stripping, because tradition holds that this is where St. Francis stripped off his clothes in front of the bishop, renouncing his father's wealth to embrace a life of poverty. A place already heavy with meaning, even before Carlo Acutis' body was brought there. I walked in slowly, my camera bag slung over my shoulder. The interior was smaller than I'd imagined, but intense. The stone walls absorbed the light filtering through the windows, creating a gathered, almost intimate atmosphere. A few people sat in the pews, praying in silence. And then I saw it. At the end of the side nave, behind an iron grate, was the crystal case containing the body of Carlo Acutis. I approached slowly, almost holding my breath. I don't know what I expected. Maybe something more spectacular, more theatrical. Instead, it was all very simple, very understated. The case was lit with soft light, and through the glass you could see the body of the teenager, dressed in jeans and a hoodie, hands folded, face serene. I stood there for several minutes, just looking. There was something strange about that sight. A kid dressed like any kid today, dead for nearly 20 years. Yet right there, present, real. He didn't look like a relic from the past. He looked like someone you might pass on the street, someone who could be your son, your brother, your classmate. I snapped a few photos with my phone, more out of habit than anything else. Then I left, my head full of thoughts I couldn't organize. The first few days of filming went well. I captured everything. Pilgrims arriving from all over the world, their prayers, their tears. I interviewed anyone willing to talk. A Brazilian woman told me her son had recovered from a rare disease after praying to Carlo. A young American guy said he'd found his faith again thanks to the website on Eucharistic miracles. An elderly nun confided that she felt Carlo's presence every time she entered the sanctuary. One story particularly struck me. A family from Mexico. They'd traveled from Guadalajara, had saved for years to make this pilgrimage. The father, a construction worker with calloused hands and tired eyes, told me their youngest daughter, Sophia, had been diagnosed with a brain tumor. Doctors had given little hope, but the child had seen a video about Carlo Acutis on YouTube and started praying to him every night. One night, the father told me, his voice breaking with emotion, Sophia woke up and told us she'd seen a boy with dark hair smiling at her. He told her not to be afraid, that Jesus was with her. The next week, the MRI showed the tumor had shrunk by 70%. The doctors couldn't explain it. I wrote everything down, filming every word. But inside me, a cynical voice whispered alternative explanations. Placebo effect, diagnostic error, spontaneous remission. I'd heard similar stories hundreds of times before. Why should this one be different? Yet watching Sophia play in the sanctuary courtyard, with her black pigtails and bright smile, something in me wavered. This wasn't a story read in a book or told secondhand. It was right there, in front of my eyes. A little girl who, according to medicine, shouldn't have been able to walk, let alone run and laugh. I interviewed the sanctuary rector, Father Marco, a priest in his 60s with a long white beard and piercing eyes. He told me about the history of the place, the meaning of St. Francis's stripping, and how Carlo Acutis had wanted to be buried right there, near the saint he so admired. Carlo had a particular devotion to St. Francis, Father Marco explained. He came to Assisi often with his family. He said he could feel the Poverello's presence in these streets, in these churches. And St. Francis, in a way, prepared the path for him. What do you mean? I asked. St. Francis taught the world that God is found in poverty, in humility, in the little things. Carlo did the same, but using the tools of his time. The internet, computers, videos. He took Francis's message and translated it for new generations. I thought about that for a long time in my hotel room that night. Two saints separated by 800 years, yet so similar in their approach. Both radical, both countercultural, both able to speak to people's hearts in ways that defied the conventions of their time. I was listening to everything with my usual professional detachment, nodding, asking the right questions, finding the best angles. But inside me, something was starting to shift. A hairline crack in the wall I'd built over all those years. It was the 5th day when it happened. Late afternoon, the sanctuary nearly empty. Sunset light poured through the western windows, painting everything in golden orange. I decided to get some shots of the tomb in that particular light, knowing it would create a stunning visual effect. I set up my camera on a tripod right in front of the crystal case. I checked the frame, adjusted the focus, and started recording. I wanted to capture the passage of light, the way it changed minute by minute, the play of shadows and reflections on the glass. I stayed there for almost an hour, motionless, silent. The camera rolled, and I watched. At some point, I realized I was no longer thinking about the documentary. I wasn't calculating shots or evaluating light quality anymore. I was simply looking, and in that silence, something changed. I don't know how to describe it. It wasn't a vision, wasn't a voice. It was more like a feeling, a deep intuition. As if someone was watching me from the other side of the glass. As if Carlo Acutis, that boy who died at 15, was somehow aware of my presence. I stood up abruptly, unsettled. I checked the camera, still recording. Good. I packed up my equipment quickly, almost anxiously, and left. That night I slept poorly. Confused dreams, full of light and shadows, faces I didn't recognize. I woke up several times with the feeling that someone was in the room with me, but every time I turned on the light, no one was there. In the days that followed, I continued filming as if nothing had happened. Professional to the core, but something had changed. Every time I entered the sanctuary, I felt that same presence, that same sensation of being watched, accompanied, almost guided. I tried to ignore it, to focus on work, but it was always there, in the background, like a sound you can't turn off. I finished shooting in 2 weeks. I flew home to Colorado with almost 100 hours of material to edit. I locked myself in my studio and began the long work of selection and assembly. Elena saw me becoming more and more distant, more closed off, but I didn't know how to explain what was happening. I didn't even understand it myself. Weeks passed, then months. The documentary was slowly taking shape. I'd chosen the best interviews, the most evocative images, the right soundtrack, but something wasn't clicking. Something was missing. A feeling of incompleteness I couldn't define. That's when I started reviewing the footage I hadn't used yet. The secondary shots, the outtakes, the pauses, and that's when I came to that video. The one from late afternoon, with the sunset light. I remembered it well. I'd filmed it on the 5th day, the day I'd first felt that strange presence, but I'd never watched it carefully. I'd filed it away as coverage footage, nothing more. That night, a Tuesday in February, I was alone in my studio. Elena had gone to bed early, and I'd stayed up working as usual. I opened the video file and let it play. For the first several minutes, nothing unusual. The crystal case, lit by sunset, Carlo's body, motionless, the play of shadows and reflections on the glass, everything as I remembered it. But then, around the 37-minute mark, something caught my attention. In the background behind the case, there was a point of light, a glow I hadn't noticed before. It looked like a reflection, maybe sunlight hitting something metallic. Nothing strange in theory, but that light was moving. I stopped the video and rewound. Watched again, this time in slow motion. Yes, it was moving. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, but moving. And it wasn't following the natural path of sunlight. It had its own rhythm, its own direction. I rubbed my eyes, thinking it must be fatigue. It was nearly 2 a.m. after all. But when I opened my eyes and looked again, the light was still there, still moving. I spent the next hours analyzing that fragment of video. I enlarged the image, adjusted the contrast, slowed it down even more. And the more I looked, the more I realized this wasn't a simple reflection. That light had a shape. It seemed almost to pulse, like a heartbeat. And at moments, just moments, it took on contours that resembled a human figure. My heart was pounding. My hands were shaking on the keyboard. This couldn't be. This couldn't be what it seemed. I called a friend, Lucas, who worked as a video technician for a major network. I sent him the file and asked him to analyze it. I needed to be sure this wasn't a camera defect, an optical aberration, something rationally explainable. Lucas was exactly the kind of person I needed in that moment. Skeptical by nature, meticulous in his work, allergic to any supernatural explanation. If there was a technical explanation for that light, he would find it. He called me back the next day. His voice was strange, uncertain. "David, I checked everything. The camera's working perfectly. No sensor defects, no compression artifacts. That light is really there. It was recorded by the camera. But I don't know what it is." "Did you try to reproduce it? To figure out where it could have come from?" "Of course I tried. I analyzed the trajectory of sunlight based on the time and date of the recording. I checked if there were any reflective surfaces in the frame that could create that kind of effect. I looked at the camera's technical specs to see if it was susceptible to certain types of light interference. And nothing. There's no logical explanation. The light doesn't follow the sun's trajectory. There are no surfaces in the frame that could create that reflection. The camera was perfectly calibrated. And the shape? That kind of figure? Silence on the other end. Then, I don't know what to tell you, David. It could be pareidolia, our brains looking for familiar patterns in random shapes. But honestly, I've never seen anything like it, and I've analyzed thousands of videos. After that call, I contacted 2 more experts. A physicist I knew from college who specialized in optics, and a fellow documentarian who'd shot footage in similar lighting conditions. Both analyzed the video and reached the same conclusion as Lucas. There was no conventional explanation. The physicist was honest with me. "David, I can tell you what that light isn't. It's not a solar reflection, it's not an optical aberration, it's not a sensor defect. But I can't tell you what it is. That's beyond my expertise." After that phone call, I spent days studying that video. I took notes, made screenshots, compared every frame to the one before. And the more I analyzed, the more details emerged. The light wasn't static. It followed a precise path, as if it were walking. It started from a point behind the case and moved slowly to the right, then disappeared out of frame. The movement lasted exactly 3 minutes and 22 seconds. I timed it multiple times, incredulous. Always the same duration, always the same path. But that wasn't all. At a certain point, around the 39-minute mark, the light seemed to stop. For 10 seconds, maybe 12, it remained motionless, right in front of the crystal case. And in those seconds, its shape became more defined. You could almost make out a head, shoulders, a torso. And then, just as the light began moving again, something even stranger happened. The glass of the case seemed to glow from within, with a faint but visible luminescence, as if something inside was responding to something outside. I wasn't sleeping anymore. I wasn't eating. Elena was worried, asking what was going on, but I didn't know what to tell her. How could I explain that I was losing my mind over a video? How could I tell her that everything I'd believed, all my professional skepticism, was crumbling before my eyes? It was during one of those sleepless nights that I did something I'd never done before. I prayed. I didn't even know how, really. I hadn't set foot in a church in years except for work. I didn't believe in anything, or so I thought. But that night, sitting in my studio with the video still paused on the screen, I closed my eyes and tried to speak. "Carlo," I whispered, feeling ridiculous. "If that's you, if this is really something I don't understand, help me understand. Please." Nothing happened. No light, no voice, no sign. Just the silence of my studio and the hum of the computer. I felt foolish, naive. What was I expecting? A miracle on demand. I went to bed defeated, convinced I was going crazy. But that night, I had a dream. I was in Assisi, in the sanctuary. But there was no one else, just me and the crystal case. The light was strange, golden, like the sunset I'd filmed. I approached the case, and through the glass I saw Carlo. But he wasn't motionless like in my video. He was looking at me. His eyes were open, alive, filled with a light I'd never seen in any human being. He opened his mouth and said one word, a word I couldn't hear, as if it were spoken in a language I didn't know. But somehow I understood it. I understood it with my heart, not my mind. Look, I woke with a start, drenched in sweat. It was 3:47 in the morning. The date, February 12th. I lay in bed for several minutes, trying to calm my racing heart. Then, driven by an impulse I couldn't explain, I got up and went to my studio. I turned on the computer and opened the video. Went straight to the 39-minute mark, to the moment when the light stopped in front of the case. And for the first time, I truly looked. I didn't just look at the light. I looked at everything. The entire frame, every corner, every detail. And that's when I saw it. In the lower right of the image, almost out of frame, there was something I'd never noticed. A piece of paper resting on a pew, probably left by some pilgrim. One of those prayer intention cards people leave at the sanctuary. I enlarged the image as much as possible. The quality wasn't great, but I could make out some handwritten words. They were in Italian, and they said, "For David, that he may see." My heart stopped. I couldn't breathe. I could feel blood pounding in my ears, my heart beating so hard it seemed ready to burst from my chest. My hands trembled on the keyboard as I desperately searched for a rational explanation. Maybe it was a different David. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe my exhausted brain was projecting meaning where there wasn't any. But then I looked again. The handwriting was clear, neat. There was no doubt about what it said. "For David, that he may see." I got up from my chair and started pacing back and forth in my studio, trying to calm down. I was a professional. I'd seen hundreds of alleged supernatural phenomena throughout my career, and every time I'd found a rational explanation. Why should this time be different? I went back to the computer and read and reread those words dozens of times, trying to convince myself I was seeing wrong, that it was just my tired mind playing tricks. But no, the words were clear. "For David, that he may see." My name, on the paper. In video I'd shot months earlier. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely use the mouse. I went back through the video, to the first minutes when I'd started filming. The paper wasn't there. The pew was empty. I went forward, minute by minute, checking every frame. The paper appeared around the 35-minute mark, 2 minutes before the light started moving. But I was alone in the sanctuary that afternoon. No one had entered while I was filming. I was certain. I'd positioned the camera to have a complete view of the chapel. I'd checked the frame at the beginning and end of the recording. That paper couldn't have been there, yet there it was. I checked again, obsessively, frame by frame, second by second. At minute 34 and 52 seconds, the pew was empty. At minute 34 and 53 seconds, the paper was there, as if it had appeared from nothing, as if someone had placed it there in an instant, in the blink of an eye. But who? And how? I spent the rest of that night in shock. I couldn't think, couldn't reason. Everything I thought I knew about reality was crumbling. There was something that defied all logic, all rational explanation, and that something had my name on it. The next morning, I did the only thing that made sense. I booked a flight to Assisi. I left that same day without even telling Elena. I left a note on the kitchen table. "I have to go back to Assisi. I'll explain everything when I return. I love you." It wasn't enough, I knew, but I had no words to explain what was happening. The trip was torture. I drove to the airport like an automaton, my mind fixed on that paper, on those words, "For David, that he may see." What was I supposed to see? What was I missing? I arrived in Assisi in the late afternoon, almost the same time I'd shot that video months before. The sanctuary was open but nearly empty. I walked in with my heart in my throat. The case was there, as always. Carlo was there, as always. But something was different. I was different. I knelt in front of the iron grate without even realizing I was doing it. My knees touched the cold stone floor, and I felt tears starting to flow. I didn't know why I was crying. I hadn't cried in years, maybe decades, but in that moment, I couldn't stop. "What am I supposed to see, Carlo?" I whispered. "What are you trying to tell me?" And in that moment, as if someone had flipped a switch, everything changed. The light in the sanctuary seemed to intensify. It couldn't have been the sun. It was almost evening, but everything glowed with a golden, warm, enveloping luminescence. And in the center of that light, behind the crystal case, I saw the form again, that luminous figure I'd captured in my video. But this time it wasn't distant, blurry, ambiguous. It was here. It was real. It was him. Carlo Acutis was looking at me. It wasn't the body in the case. It was something else. Someone. A presence that radiated a peace and joy I had never felt in my life. His eyes, those eyes that had told me look in the video, now gazed at me with infinite, unconditional, total love. He was dressed like in the photos I'd seen. Jeans, a red hoodie, sneakers. But there was something different about him. A light that seemed to come from within, as if he were made of something more than matter. His dark hair waved slightly, though there was no wind. And his smile was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. He didn't look like a ghost, didn't look like a hallucination. He seemed more real than myself, more real than the sanctuary's stones, more real than the crystal case between us. "David," he said, not with his lips, not with an audible voice, but I heard him clearly, deep within my being. "You finally see me." I don't know how long that experience lasted. It could have been seconds or hours. Time had lost all meaning. But in those moments, my entire life flashed before my eyes. Every choice, every mistake, every missed opportunity, and alongside all of it, an understanding, a revelation. I saw myself at 7 years old, at my grandmother Teresa's funeral. I saw the anger I'd carried inside, the unconscious decision to close my heart so I'd never hurt again. I saw every wall I'd built, every door I'd shut, every opportunity for grace I'd refused. And I saw something else. I saw that I had never been alone. I saw that my grandmother, my grandfather, everyone I had loved and lost, had always been there on the other side of the veil, waiting. And I saw Carlo, this boy I had never known in life, who had taken upon himself the task of reaching me, like a messenger, like a bridge, like a friend I never knew I had. I'd spent my life filming other people's faith without ever letting it touch me. I'd built sky-high walls between myself and the sacred, convinced that detachment was professionalism, that objectivity was virtue. But really, I was just scared, afraid to believe, afraid to hope, afraid to love something greater than myself. And Carlo, this boy who died at 15, had patiently waited until I was ready. He'd put my name on that paper, guided my camera, made that light appear, all so I could finally see. But see what? "Your camera," said the voice. "Look at what you filmed." I didn't understand. I'd analyzed that video hundreds of times. What could I have possibly missed? But then I remembered. In the moment when the light had stopped in front of the case, the glass had glowed from within. I'd noticed that glow, but I'd never understood what it meant. I hadn't looked closely enough. The vision gradually faded. The light returned to normal. The sanctuary regained its usual appearance. I was alone again, kneeling on the cold floor, but I didn't feel alone. I had never felt less alone in my life. I flew back to Colorado that same night. I walked into my studio without even taking off my coat. I turned on the computer and opened the video, went to minute 39 and 14 seconds. The exact moment when the glass of the case had glowed. This time I zoomed in as far as I could, adjusted the contrast, increased the brightness, and finally, after months of searching, I saw. Inside the case, reflected on the glass, there was an image. Not Carlo's reflection, not a reflection of the external light. A distinct image that seemed to come from within the glass itself. It was a face. The face of an elderly woman with white hair and a gentle smile. And beside her, slightly out of focus but recognizable, another figure. A man, younger, with sad eyes. I recognized them. They were my grandparents. My maternal grandparents, both dead since I was a child, Grandma Teresa and Grandpa Ernest. I hadn't seen them in 30 years, except in a few faded photos my mother kept in a drawer. Grandma Teresa died when I was 7. I still remembered the day of her funeral, even though I tried never to think about it. I remembered the smell of flowers, the sound of the organ, my mother's tears. But most of all, I remembered the rage. A rage I didn't understand, couldn't express, but that burned inside me like fire. Why her? Why the person I loved most in the world? Why did God, if he existed, take her away? Grandpa Ernest died 2 years later, of a broken heart, everyone said. He'd never gotten over losing his wife. He just faded away slowly, like a candle running out of wax, and eventually he simply stopped. And now, 30 years later, their faces were there, in the reflection of a crystal case, beside a beatified teenager, as if they'd been waiting for me, as if they'd always known that one day I would find them. And in that moment, everything made sense. My grandmother had been a deeply religious woman. She was the one who took me to Mass when I was little, taught me prayers, talked about angels and saints as if they were old family friends. She told me stories of miracles and apparitions, of saints who devoted their lives to God, of martyrs who chose death rather than renounce their faith. Every night before bed, she'd have me recite the guardian angel prayer. Angel of God, my guardian dear, to whom God's love commits me here. Ever this day be at my side, to light and guard, to rule and guide. Amen. Then she'd kiss my forehead and tell me the angels would protect me all night long. When she died, I was 7. And with her, my faith died too. I'd never consciously understood it, but that's what happened. Her death had created a void that I'd filled with cynicism, with detachment, with that false objectivity I called professionalism. I stopped believing because believing hurt too much. Because if God existed, why did he take away the person I loved most? For 30 years, I'd carried that question inside me, buried under layers of rationality and professionalism. For 30 years, I'd avoided looking it in the face, confronting it, seeking an answer. It was easier not to believe. It was easier to watch other people's faith through a lens, always keeping that safe distance. And now, finally, I understood. Grandma Teresa had never left me. She'd been there all along, patiently waiting until I was ready to see her. And Carlo, this boy who died at 15, had built a bridge between us. He'd used his technology, his faith, his ability to touch hearts, to bring me home. And now, 30 years later, my grandmother was there, in the reflection of a crystal case, beside a beatified boy, telling me everything was okay, that she'd never left me, that the faith she'd taught me was still there, buried under layers of pain and fear, waiting for someone to reawaken it. Carlo Acutis had done exactly that. He'd used my own profession, my own cameras, to show me something I couldn't ignore. He'd put my name on that paper because he knew I'd find it. He'd made my grandparents' faces appear because he knew I'd recognize them, and all of it, every single detail, had been there from the beginning, in the video I'd shot months before, waiting for me to finally be ready to see. I cried for hours that night. I cried for my grandmother, for my grandfather, for all the lost years. I cried for my willful blindness, for my stubborn refusal to believe, but they were tears of liberation, not sadness. Each tear carried away a bit of the weight I'd been carrying for so long. When Elena woke up the next morning, she found me still in my studio, in front of the computer. But I was no longer the man who had left the day before. Something had changed inside me. Something that couldn't be explained with words or logic. "David?" she said, her voice worried. "Are you okay? What happened in Assisi?" I looked at her. This woman who had put up with me for all those years, who had loved a man incapable of truly loving. I took her hands and kissed them, with a tenderness I didn't know I had. "I need to tell you a story," I said. "A story about a boy who died at 15, and about a detail I ignored for too long. In the months that followed, my life changed completely, not in dramatic outward ways. I kept making documentaries, kept filming churches and pilgrimages and monasteries, but now I did it with new eyes. I was no longer a detached observer. I was a witness. I finished the Carlo Acutis documentary, but not the way I'd planned. It was no longer an objective documentary about popular devotion. It was a personal testimony, the story of a man who had spent his life filming faith without believing in it, and who had found faith through what he filmed. I included the video, of course, Not all of it, just the crucial moments. The moving light, the paper with my name, the faces in the reflection. I let the audience judge for themselves. I didn't want to convince anyone. I just wanted to show what I had seen. The documentary had unexpected success. It was shown at several festivals, broadcast on television, discussed in newspapers. Some called it an elaborate fake. Others a masterpiece of storytelling, others still proof of the supernatural. I didn't care about the criticism or the praise. I had done what I needed to do. But the most important thing wasn't the documentary. It was what happened after. I started receiving letters, emails, messages from all over the world. People who had seen the documentary and wanted to tell me their stories. Stories of ignored signs, unexplainable coincidences. Moments when the veil between the visible and invisible had grown thin. A woman in Argentina wrote that her terminally ill son had dreamed of Carlo Acutis the night before he died. In the dream, Carlo had shown him a beautiful place and told him not to be afraid. The boy died peacefully, with a smile on his face. I don't know if it was a miracle, the mother wrote, but I know my son met someone that night, someone who gave him peace. A man in Japan told me he'd found one of Carlo's prayer cards in his mailbox, with no explanation of how it got there. He lived in a small apartment in Tokyo, knew no Catholics, had never heard of Carlo Acutis. But that card made him curious. He started researching online, discovered the website on Eucharistic miracles, read the story of that Italian teenager who died young, and something changed inside him. That prayer card led him to convert to Christianity after a lifetime of atheism. A young woman in the United States confided that she had attempted suicide, but just as she was about to do it, she heard a voice telling her to stop. A young, cheerful voice that spoke to her about Jesus in the Eucharist and the beauty of life. She didn't know who Carlo Acutis was, but when she saw his photo for the first time, she recognized the voice. It was him, she wrote. No doubt, he saved my life. A priest in Nigeria told me that devotion to Carlo had transformed his parish. Young people who used to skip Mass were now gathering in the Eucharistic Adoration Chapel. They'd formed a prayer group inspired by Carlo, organized charity events, used social media to share their faith. Carlo speaks their language, the priest wrote. He speaks about God using tools they understand, and they listen. A family in Australia sent me a video. Their 6-year-old daughter, born deaf, had started hearing after her parents prayed to Carlo Acutis for an entire year. The doctors couldn't explain it. In the video, the little girl was laughing and clapping her hands while her mother played the piano. It was the first time she'd ever heard music. Every story was different, yet every story was the same. Carlo Acutis wasn't just a beatified boy in a crystal case. He was an active, living presence who continued to touch people's lives in ways that defied all rational explanation. And I, who had spent 15 years filming the sacred without believing in it, had become one of his witnesses. I keep all those letters in a box in my studio. I reread them sometimes, when faith wavers, when doubt creeps in. They remind me I'm not alone. They remind me that Carlo is still working, still searching, still reaching those who need to be reached. I've returned to Assisi many times since that experience. Every time I enter the sanctuary, I feel that same peace, that same presence. I never saw the light again, never had more visions, but I didn't need to. I knew Carlo was there. I knew my grandparents were there. I knew I had never been alone, not even in my darkest years. The last time I went, it was a spring morning. The sanctuary was nearly empty, lit by soft sunlight filtering through the stained glass. I knelt in front of the case, as I always do, and spoke to Carlo like you'd speak to an old friend. I told him about my joys and fears. I talked about Elena, about how our marriage had blossomed since I opened my heart. I told him about future projects, documentaries I want to make, stories I want to tell, and I thanked him for seeking me when I was lost, for waiting when I wasn't ready, for putting my name on that paper. Before leaving, I placed my hand on the glass of the case. I know it seems like a strange gesture, maybe inappropriate, but in that moment I felt something, a warmth, a subtle vibration, like a distant heartbeat, and I knew, with a certainty that goes beyond reason, that Carlo was there with me, that he was listening, that he was smiling. My camera became a different instrument, no longer a way to keep my distance, but a way to draw closer. Every shot was a prayer, every recording an act of faith. I still filmed Italian spirituality, but now I was part of it. Elena saw the change and was glad. "You finally took off that armor," she told me one evening as we had dinner on our back porch. "You were so closed off, so distant. Now you're here. Really here. She was right. For years I had lived behind glass, just like Carlo's body in its case. I observed the world without touching it, without letting it touch me. But that detail in the video, that mysterious message, had shattered the glass. It had forced me to come out, to feel, to believe. About a year after my experience, I received an unexpected phone call. It was Carlo's mother, Carlo Acutis. She had seen the documentary and wanted to meet me. I flew to Milan with my heart in my throat. I didn't know what to expect, didn't know what to say to a woman who had lost her son and seen him become a blessed of the Catholic Church. What could I say to her? I who had spent my life doubting everything she believed in. Antonia welcomed me into her home with a serene smile. She was an elegant, composed woman, but with a light in her eyes that I recognized. The same light I had seen in the reflection of the case, the same light I now felt inside me. The apartment was bright, tidy, full of books and photos. I immediately noticed the images of Carlo on the shelves. Carlo as a child, Carlo as a teenager, Carlo with his dogs, Carlo at the computer. An ordinary life on the surface. But I knew that behind that ordinariness lay something extraordinary. "I saw your documentary," she said as we sat in her living room. "It's very different from the others." "I know," I replied, not knowing if it was a compliment or a criticism. "I realize it's not what most people expect." Antonia smiled. "No, it isn't. But it's authentic. You can tell you experienced something profound, something that changed the way you see. Carlo spoke to you," she continued, without a shadow of doubt in her voice. "He does that, you know. He speaks to people, especially those who need to be reached." I told her everything. The video, the light, the paper with my name, my grandparents' faces. She listened in silence, nodding occasionally, as if everything I was saying were perfectly normal. "Your son," I concluded, "showed me something I had ignored for 30 years. He made me understand that faith isn't a weakness, but a gift. And he reconciled me with the people I loved and lost." Antonia took my hands. Hers were warm, soft, reassuring. Carlo always said the Eucharist is the highway to heaven, but he also knew that not everyone can find the entrance. That's why he kept looking for new ways to reach them. His website, his videos, his passion for technology. It was all in service of this goal, helping people see. To see, I repeated, remembering the word from my dream. Yes, to see. Carlo believed that Jesus was truly present in the Eucharist, and that this truth was visible to anyone with eyes to look. But he also knew that most people have their eyes closed. Not out of malice, but out of fear, pain, habit. His task, he believed, was to help them open their eyes. I remained silent for a moment, absorbing her words. Then I asked the question that had been burning inside me for months. "Mrs. Acutis, how do you bear all this? Your son died at 15, and now he's a blessed. Millions of people venerate him, make pilgrimages to his tomb. Isn't it too much?" Antonia smiled, a smile that contained everything. The pain of loss, the joy of faith, the peace of hope. "Carlo didn't die," she said simply. "He just changed the way he lives. Before, he lived here, with me, in this house. Now he lives there, with Jesus. But he's not far away. He's never far away. I feel him every day, in every prayer, in every Eucharist. And I see him in the faces of people like you, who come to tell me how he's touched their lives." I flew home that evening with my heart light. Antonia had given me something precious. Confirmation that what I'd experienced was real. Not a hallucination, not a trick of a tired mind. A grace, a gift. And with that gift came a responsibility, the responsibility to testify, to share, to show others what I had seen. Not to convince them, but to invite them. To tell them that there was something beyond the visible, something worth searching for. I kept making documentaries, but my approach had changed forever. I was no longer the detached observer. I was a pilgrim with a camera, a man of faith with a story to tell. And every time someone asked how it all began, I went back to that October afternoon in Assisi, to the sunset light streaming through the windows, to the camera rolling silently, to the detail I had ignored for months. Because here's the truth. Signs are everywhere. Heaven is constantly speaking to us, through light, through coincidences, through the people we meet. But most of us have our eyes closed. We're too busy, too distracted, too afraid to see. Carlo Acutis knew that, and he dedicated his short life, and now his eternity, to helping us open our eyes. I was one of those with my eyes closed. For 40 years, I looked without seeing, filmed without believing, lived without truly living. But one ignored detail, one message hidden in a video, changed everything. I don't know why Carlo chose me. I don't know why he put my name on that paper, why he made my grandparents' faces appear in that reflection. Maybe because I had the right cameras. Maybe because I was in the right place at the right time. Or maybe simply because he decided it was time for me to open my eyes. Whatever the reason, I'm grateful. Grateful for that mysterious light moving behind the case. Grateful for those handwritten words on a paper that shouldn't have been there. Grateful for my grandparents' faces, reminding me where I came from and where I was going. And grateful for Carlo, a boy who died at 15 but continues to live in ways that defy all logic. A boy who used technology to speak of God and who now uses dreams, visions, hidden details, and videos to keep doing it. Every time I enter the sanctuary of the Spogliazione in Assisi now, I know I'm not alone. I know Carlo is there, behind that glass and beyond it. I know he's watching me, as he watched me that day through my camera. And I know he's waiting, patient as ever, for other eyes to open. My story isn't special. It's one of the many thousands Carlo has touched and continues to touch every day. But it's my story. And for me, it changed everything. Sometimes I wonder why me. Why, of all the people who visit the sanctuary, of all the documentarians who filmed that place, Carlo chose to reach me. I don't have a definitive answer, but I believe it has something to do with my profession. I spend my life looking through lenses, capturing images, preserving moments, showing others what my eyes see. But for years, I looked without truly seeing. I filmed faith without believing in it, captured miracles without accepting them, preserved sacred moments while treating them as mere anthropological curiosities. Carlo, with his passion for technology, understood something I had forgotten. The tools we use can become vehicles of grace. A camera can capture more than images. A video can contain more than pixels. And sometimes, in the details we ignore, messages are hiding, just waiting to be discovered. If you're listening to these words, maybe you too have an ignored detail in your life. A coincidence you dismissed, a dream you forgot, a sign you didn't know how to read. Maybe you too are looking without seeing, just as I was. Maybe you've lost someone you loved, and the pain has closed your eyes. Maybe you've stopped believing because believing seemed too hard, too risky, too painful. Maybe you've built walls just like I did, to protect yourself from a hope you feared might disappoint you. But I'm here to tell you those walls can fall. I'm here to tell you that those you loved and lost are not far away. I'm here to tell you that heaven is closer than you think, and that sometimes all it takes is one detail, one small ignored sign to throw open the doors. My invitation is simple. Look again. Look more closely. Search through your memories, your photos, your dreams. Because heaven is always speaking, and sometimes all it takes is one detail filmed at a tomb to finally hear its voice. Today, when I look at the world through my camera, I no longer see just images. I see possibilities. I see hidden messages. I see the invisible trying to make itself visible. And I know that somewhere, behind every frame, Carlo is smiling, because he knows I finally understand. Carlo Acutis said, "Everyone is born an original, but many die as photocopies." For 40 years, I was a photocopy, a professional good at his job but hollow inside, a man who filmed other people's faith without having any of his own. But that video, that ignored detail, brought me back to the original. It reminded me who I really was, who I had been before pain and fear closed my eyes. It made me rediscover my grandmother's faith, that simple, deep faith I had buried along with her. And now, finally, I can say I'm alive. No longer behind glass, no longer behind a camera, but here, present, alive, believing. Thank you, Carlo. Thank you for never giving up on reaching me. Thank you for waiting until I was ready. Thank you for that detail everyone had ignored. No one was ready for what it would reveal. But when I finally saw it, everything made sense, and I'll never stop looking. If this story has touched your heart, consider entrusting your prayers to the intercession of Carlo Acutis. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future testimonies of faith that can transform lives.